There was a time when her name was inseparable from his, when every magazine cover, every tabloid headline, and every late-night monologue treated her like a supporting character in someone else's scandal. For years, the world knew her only as Tiger Woods' wife, then Tiger Woods' ex-wife, as if she had no story of her own worth telling. But nearly 2 decades after she first stepped into the spotlight she never asked for, Elin Nordegren has quietly built a life so different from the one the tabloids predicted for her that it's almost hard to believe it's the same woman. So what actually happened to her? How did she go from the most photographed wronged wife in modern sports history to someone who barely appears in headlines at all? Take a breath, because her real story is nothing like the one that made front pages back in 2009. Most people who lived through that era remember the tabloid version, the smashed car window, the parade of women coming forward, the golden marriage collapsing overnight on national television. Fewer people ever bothered to ask what happened to the woman standing at the center of it all once the cameras finally turned elsewhere. That's the part of the story worth slowing down for. Long before anyone in America knew her name, Ella Maria Pernilla Nordegren was growing up in Stockholm, Sweden. Born on the first day of January 1980. Her household was anything but shallow. Her mother, Barbro Holmberg, was a career politician who would go on to hold a cabinet-level post overseeing Sweden's migration and asylum policy. Her father, Thomas Nordegren, spent decades as a foreign correspondent, reporting from Washington for Swedish radio. Growing up surrounded by people who valued ideas over image left a mark on Ellen. She wasn't chasing fame as a kid. She worked ordinary jobs, studied hard, and picked up modeling assignments here and there mostly as a way to make money, not as a stepping stone to celebrity. It's worth remembering that detail, because it explains almost everything about how she'd later handle the biggest crisis of her life, with restraint, not spectacle. Her path to the United States wasn't glamorous, either. After finishing school, she took a retail job in Sweden, where she happened to meet Mia Parnevik, the wife of Swedish golfer Jesper Parnevik. The two hit it off, and Mia offered Ellen a position as a nanny for her children. Ellen accepted, packed up, and moved to Florida to live with the Parnevik family, a decision made for practical reasons, not ambition. It was through the Parnevik's social circle, deeply connected to the professional golf world, that she was eventually introduced to a young athlete who was already reshaping the sport, Tiger Woods. It's a small detail, but it says a lot. The woman who would later become one of the most photographed people on the planet spent her formative years being taught, implicitly and explicitly, that a person's worth has nothing to do with how many people are watching them. That upbringing would be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined. By most accounts, Ellen wasn't especially interested in dating a famous athlete when she first met Tiger. Jesper Parnevik later said she'd been wary of the chaos that came with dating a superstar, and it reportedly took Tiger months of persistence before she agreed to go out with him. What started quietly turned into a serious relationship, and in November 2003 the couple got engaged during a trip to South Africa, with Tiger proposing at a luxury game reserve. Less than a year later, in October 2004, they married in an extravagant, heavily guarded ceremony at a resort in Barbados. It was a kind of wedding built for privacy despite its scale. Dozens of security personnel, a closed guest list of sports and entertainment figures, and almost no photos released to the public. The newlyweds settled into a sprawling estate in Windermere, Florida, and for the next several years, they presented the image of a golden couple. Tiger kept winning tournaments and signing endorsement deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while Ellen mostly stayed out of the public eye. She turned down interview requests, even lucrative ones, and rarely spoke to the press. In 2007, the couple welcomed a daughter, Sam Alexis, and in 2009, a son, Charlie. To the outside world, it looked like the model of a modern power family. A dominant athlete husband, 2 young kids, and a wife who seemed content to stay out of the noise. What almost no one knew at the time was how uncomfortable that quiet life actually was for Ellen. Friends and family later described her as someone who missed ordinary things, walking through a store without being recognized, having a private conversation without wondering who was listening. Being married to one of the most famous athletes on the planet meant every mundane moment carried the risk of becoming a headline. Still, on the surface, nothing appeared broken. That illusion wouldn't last much longer. There's a version of this story where a young woman marries a global superstar and gets swept up in the glamour of it. The private jets, the red carpets, the sponsorship parties. That's not really what happened here. By nearly every account from people who knew her at the time, Elin treated fame as something to be endured rather than enjoyed. She wasn't building a brand around being Mrs. Woods. She was raising two small children in a house that happened to sit at the center of a media hurricane, and doing her best to keep that hurricane as far from her kids as she could. In the early hours of November 27, 2009, Thanksgiving weekend, Tiger Woods crashed his SUV into a fire hydrant and a tree just outside the family's Florida home. What began as a strange, minor-sounding local news item exploded, within days, into one of the biggest scandals in sports history. Reports quickly surfaced that Elin had confronted Tiger that night over messages she'd found on his phone, messages that pointed to an affair. In the chaos that followed the confrontation, accounts suggest she broke the back window of his vehicle with a golf club as he tried to drive off. When neighbors ran outside after hearing the crash, they reportedly found Tiger on the ground, hurt, with Elin nearby. From there, the story spiraled far beyond a single incident. In the days and weeks that followed, more than a dozen women came forward claiming affairs with Tiger during his marriage. Waitresses, nightclub employees, and others from across the country, some producing text messages or voicemails as evidence. It became a non-stop media event, dissected hour by hour on entertainment news, and covered relentlessly by tabloids competing for the next detail. Sponsors began pulling away almost immediately. Longtime partners scaled back their relationships with him or cut ties completely, and the brand Tiger had spent over a decade building started to crumble in real time. Tiger eventually gave a televised, carefully worded apology in February 2010, admitted to letting his family down, and announced an indefinite break from competitive golf. His performance on the course collapsed along with his personal life. He went the entire 2010 season without a single tournament win, and his world ranking fell from number 1 to outside the top 50 within a year. Through all of it, Elin said almost nothing publicly. No angry statements, no leaked quotes, no appearances designed to win public sympathy. She was occasionally photographed at her children's school events or visiting family in Sweden, composed as ever, while speculation about her next move dominated tabloid coverage for months. It's worth pausing here to consider just how strange that period must have been from the inside. Overnight, Elin went from being a private person who occasionally appeared in the background of golf broadcasts to being one of the most searched, photographed, and speculated about women in the world, not because of anything she did, but because of what had been done to her. Every psychologist who commented publicly on the situation at the time pointed to the same thing. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was a very public form of trauma, playing out in real time, with millions of strangers weighing in on how she should feel about it. In August 2010, Elin filed for divorce. There was no courtroom drama and no dramatic press conference, just a brief joint statement from attorneys confirming the marriage was over, along with a custody arrangement for their 2 children. Reports at the time estimated the settlement at roughly $100 million, though the exact figure was never officially confirmed, and it remains one of the largest celebrity divorce settlements ever reported. What mattered more to Elin, according to people close to her, wasn't the money. It was making sure her children were shielded from the fallout as much as possible, and both she and Tiger were granted shared custody, with reports describing the arrangement as unusually cooperative given the circumstances. Even after the divorce, the media wasn't ready to let her go. She was photographed on the beach, at grocery stores, at playgrounds, every image scrutinized for hints about her emotional state. Eventually, she gave her first and only detailed comments about the scandal in an interview with People magazine, describing how blindsided she'd felt and how she'd had no idea what had been happening during her marriage. She spoke about the shock of realizing the life she thought she had wasn't what it seemed, about needing therapy to process the betrayal, and about the slow, deliberate work of trying to forgive, something she described as the final stage of grief, not something that happens on anyone else's timeline. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from someone who had otherwise kept the entire ordeal almost entirely private, and after that interview, she went quiet again, refusing to feed the story any further. What's striking looking back is how consistent her behavior was throughout the entire ordeal. She never contradicted herself in interviews because she essentially never gave any. She never got caught in a lie because she never tried to spin the story in her favor. In an environment practically engineered to reward outrage and oversharing, she chose the opposite path. And in doing so, she denied the tabloids the one thing they wanted most, a reaction they could turn into the next headline. Here's where most tabloid narratives about wronged celebrity wives tend to follow script. A reality show, a tell-all book, maybe a clothing line riding the wave of sympathy and notoriety. Elin did none of that. Instead, in the years after her divorce, she enrolled at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, to study psychology, a full academic program, not a symbolic gesture. She reportedly sat in classes alongside students who had no idea who she was, and by all accounts, she took the work seriously. In 2014, she graduated with a GPA close to a perfect 4.0, earned an award recognizing outstanding academic and personal achievement, and gave a short speech at commencement about resilience and gratitude. For a woman once defined entirely by her marriage, walking across that stage as a psychology graduate was its own kind of statement. At the same time, she was quietly building something else, a real estate portfolio. In 2011, she bought an oceanfront property in North Palm Beach for roughly $12 million, tore down the existing structure, and spent years overseeing a full rebuild that blended Scandinavian minimalism with coastal design. In 2020, she sold that finished home for more than double what she paid, making it one of the more notable residential flips in the region that year. She never publicized a project, never turned it into content, and never leaned on her name to market it. It simply happened, quietly, the way most of her post-divorce life has. There's something almost defiant about that choice, even if it never looked defiant from the outside. In an era when personal misfortune is routinely turned into content, book deals, docuseries, monetized social media accounts built around a single dramatic chapter of someone's life, Elin did the opposite. She turned her most painful public moment into a private, unremarkable process of getting an education and starting a business. The same way millions of ordinary people rebuild their lives after a divorce, just with considerably more money and considerably less privacy to work with. Elin's personal life moved forward on the same low-key terms. She had a relationship with businessman Chris Klein for a few years before it ended in 2017, and shortly after, she began seeing Jordan Cameron, a former NFL tight end who'd played for the Cleveland Browns and Miami Dolphins before retiring due to a string of concussions. Like Elin, Cameron had already stepped away from a high-profile career and seemed to value privacy over publicity, which made the pairing feel less like tabloid fodder and more like two people who understood each other. In 2019, Elin was spotted with a visible baby bump before any announcement was made, and later that year, she gave birth to a son. Since then, she and Cameron have expanded their family further, and by most accounts, the couple now shares a blended household of several children. Elin's 2 kids with Tiger, a child from Cameron's earlier relationship, and multiple children the two have had together. Friends have described her as finally living the kind of full, noisy family life she'd always wanted. This time, without the constant presence of cameras. There's been no public wedding announcement, no red carpet debut as a couple, and virtually no social media presence from either of them. It's a relationship built almost entirely outside the public record, which, for someone who spent years having every detail of her private life picked apart, seems to be exactly the point. Compare that to how so many high-profile breakups play out today, with new relationships announced through carefully staged photos or drip-fed hints designed to generate engagement. Elin's relationship with Cameron has unfolded almost entirely off the record, confirmed mostly through the occasional sighting rather than any deliberate reveal. It's a pattern that's held for nearly a decade now, and it doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. Perhaps one of the more overlooked parts of Elin's story is how her relationship with Tiger evolved after the divorce. Rather than staying locked in the antagonism the tabloids assumed would follow such a public collapse, the two reportedly worked to build a functional, even amicable co-parenting relationship. They've been seen together at their children's sporting events over the years, and Tiger has spoken publicly on more than one occasion, about how much he credits Elin as a mother and how important it's been for them to prioritize their kids over their own history. Their daughter Sam and son Charlie are now teenagers, and Charlie in particular has drawn attention for following his father into competitive junior golf, with Elin regularly showing up to watch from the sidelines, present, but never looking to be part of the story herself. That kind of outcome wasn't guaranteed. Plenty of high-profile divorces curdle into decades-long hostility, especially ones that began with a scandal as public and painful as this one. That Elin and Tiger managed to build something functional, instead says as much about her approach to the situation as it does about his effort to make amends. Neither one used their children as leverage in the media, and neither one, as far as the public record shows, ever broke that agreement in the years since. Today, more than 15 years removed from the scandal that once made her one of the most photographed women on earth, Elin Nordegren lives a life almost entirely outside the entertainment ecosystem that tried to define her. She owns property in Florida, splits her time raising a large blended family, stays involved in causes tied to psychology and emotional well-being without turning it into a public brand, and appears in the media so rarely that when she does, it's treated as a minor event rather than a headline. She never became a lifestyle influencer, never sold her story for a payday, and never let the worst chapter of her life become the whole book. It would have been easy, understandable even, for her to disappear entirely after 2010, or to lean hard into the sympathy the public was ready to give her. She did neither. Instead, she went back to school, built something with her own hands, found a quieter kind of love, and let her privacy be the one thing the tabloids could never take from her twice. So the next time someone brings up Tiger Woods' scandal or replays that infamous late-night crash from 2009, it's worth remembering the other side of that story. The woman who didn't need headlines to prove she'd moved on, because she was too busy actually living her life. What do you think? Did Elin Nordegren come out of all of this stronger than anyone expected? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn